Well, hello there and welcome back to my channel. Today we're looking at something that's been waiting for a while now, almost 2 months. It's been winging its way to me, and that's this guy here. Probably recognise it. It's the ImmersionRC Ghost system. It's finally arrived. I've got it connected up to my transmitter, and we're going to have a little look at it now briefly. It comes in a nice little box like this. This was the kit that was the module, and 3 receivers and 3 of the little tiny T antennas that we'll have a look at in a second. So we're going to have a look at the product, and then I'm going to have some of my thoughts on the product itself, on the Ghost system, and also the inevitable comparison to Crossfire, because I've got that as well. But my viewpoint perhaps on Crossfire comes from a slightly different perspective perhaps than most people's view of Crossfire, but we'll get to that later on in the video. So let's have a look at the product. Firstly, obviously, because we're putting it's a new system in OpenTX radio, we need to download the latest version of OpenTX, which is relatively straightforward. And then you also, because it will start complaining, and you certainly did with my radio, you need to install, for this radio with a multi-protocol module, you need to install the new firmware for the multi-protocol module inside, which is a little bit more awkward. With this particular radio I was having difficulty until I watched an Albert Kim video, and he basically said you need to make the file name very short and then it will be recognized by the radio. I did that, cut the file name down because it had lots of numbers and letters and long file name, cut it right down, then the radio saw it and then it updated, no problem, and the 4-in-1 multi-protocol module stopped complaining and it all worked nicely. And obviously now you get the option of Ghost when you're setting up a model in the options, but there are plenty of videos on that. We won't go into that straight away. This is just looking at an overview of the product itself, and I'm very impressed with it. It fit in quite nicely. Had to update it obviously to the latest firmware. This was like 05, it was the last one, and there's 3 or 4 new updates, firmware updates since that, so I had to update that, and then it automatically updates the little receivers, which are really good, so you don't need to worry about plugging them in or doing anything. As soon as it first binds, it then asks you, would you like to do an update? And you do the update, and that's great. So it works really well. It has a little screen. Let's turn this on actually so we can see it. Turn on the radio. So, and hopefully it should spring to life. Oh, switch warning. Is it moaning out? There we go. Now it's turned on. So there we are. So it has a nice screen. Hopefully you can see that quite clearly there. It's the main screen, gives you some interesting information, and you can move along. So it's the status, so the battery voltage, and this is the transmitter. This is the firmware. It's running 1012. I think it came with 1005. So this has got some bug fixes and things like that. So I'd highly recommend that you connect it up and then update this. And that was quite straightforward, very similar to using the system with the Crossfire uses, downloading an app or program on your computer, connecting up, and then working through that app and it working very well. So that was very straightforward. We've got some channel maps that we can see, so we can see our channels moving about. We've got some latency, so we can see latency between the transmitter and the receiver, which is very useful. And then we can change, if we've got a tramp based VTX connected up to our receiver, which we'll talk about in a second, then you can change the frequency and the power and all that sort of stuff using this, which is a really clever little idea, especially if you're using perhaps a fixed wing and maybe you haven't got loads of stuff on it, but you want an FPV fixed wing, but you haven't got like iNav or anything like that on it, where you could change your VTX settings. Well, you can do that through the module on the back here, so that's really useful. And then we're back to the first screen, and if we click on it, we've got all our options here, which are all pretty self-explanatory. Very useful indeed. So there we go, there's the module on the back. Very impressed with that. Very easy to set up, very similar to Crossfire, which is useful, especially if you have experience with that system. What else do we get? Well, we get 3 of these, the 3 little, what they call QT antennas, quite small, and then you get 3 of these tiny, minuscule little receivers here. Tiny little guy here. And to compare it, this is a Crossfire nano receiver, and that is, it's a bit shorter, you can see that clearly there, but that's a little bit wider. So slightly different dimensions, around about the same size, similar kind of feel. So you mean, quite honestly, there's nothing really you can fit this on particularly. I mean, I'll get to it in a minute, but we'll just show it here. I've got one of the receivers on this little guitar pick based quad, so it's based on the guitar pick frame, but a little toothpick style quad, and that fit in there without any problems, apart from a couple of things, but we'll get to that in a minute. So if you can fit in a little quad like this, it can fit in most things. Just as a comparison, this is the smallest receiver I've been using up until this point, which is a little Fly Sky receiver here, and this is actually smaller, and this is the larger of the receivers. There's actually a small one that I've got on order, hasn't arrived yet, but it's just smaller than this apparently, with the same functionality, so you've got to be careful you don't lose that, to be honest. So there we go, that's the receiver. So then, that's just a brief overview of the system. Setting up, quite straightforward. Obviously we've got to do some firmware updates, but we have to do those periodically anyway. You want to keep on the latest firmware, so that was slightly awkward, but apart from that, no issues so far. It's connected up to that quad, and there are any problems with that. I've connected up in S-Bus mode. Haven't tried the other mode yet, but I'm connected up in S-Bus because that seemed basically most straightforward. I know that it's got its own protocol, but that's not quite there yet, I don't believe. So using a S-Bus, I won't notice the latency, to be honest. You know, not that much of a pilot to notice those few milliseconds, so, but hopefully I will notice something. So we've got all of that out of the way, the transmitter and everything. So now we just have the two modules here, Ghost and Crossfire. Now I said I have perhaps a slightly different perspective on Crossfire because I haven't been using this for very long. In fact, I only bought this while I was waiting for this, so a couple of weeks ago, because I wanted to compare the two and also want to do some more long range stuff. And I know Crossfire is the king of long range, there's no doubt about that. It's sitting up there, and no one, and perhaps even sadly for ImmersionRC, they're not going to knock Crossfire off the top of the perch. It is the top, and there's a good reason for that. It's been around a long time, it's very reliable, it's beloved by a lot of pilots, and from what I've been going through and using it, I can understand why they really like this system. I said I had to do an update on it, that worked well. It was the Agent X program that it has online, really straightforward. Connecting it up, that was fine. Connects to Crossfire, get all the telemetry back, setting all that up, getting the link quality in your goggles, that's quite straightforward. There's plenty of videos and support online. If you have any issues, it works so well, and obviously the ImmersionRC system doesn't have that. But when looking at these two systems, I can see where one would be better over the other, and one, you know, perhaps you would want more than the other, and we'll get to that as we go through it. A bit of a sort of, you know, just my thoughts sort of conversation, so we'll just, as we go through, discuss these points, not necessarily in any particular order. But I have to say, from what I've gone through to begin with, I really like both systems. I think they're excellent systems, perhaps for very different reasons, different purposes, but still very good systems. If you have either of these, I think you'll be very happy with what you have, certainly happier than perhaps using maybe a Fly Sky or an FR Sky system. These are so much better because they've been more thought out. I mean, this guy here, as I mentioned before, is a great little receiver, but it's still got limitations, you know, the antenna, and it doesn't have telemetry, it doesn't have this, doesn't have that, and, you know, is it a clone, is it a copy? I'm not sure. It gets all a bit muddy with these receivers, whereas these guys, they have pedigree, they have systems that work very well, they've been thought about and designed. These aren't copies or clones or anything else. This is top of the range technology being used and designed by people who know what they're talking about and who want to create a good product that's used by the community, which is excellent. So, as we said, I'm really impressed with the Crossfire and with the Ghost system, but there's some things that I've come across just by using these two systems. And it's interesting, we start perhaps with the units themselves. Now, I quite like having the screen on the back here, having this little joystick and being able to make all the adjustments on the screen here, as opposed to having to fiddle with the screen on the transmitter itself. That's really useful. I really like that. I like having the screen. Now, I know some of the older Crossfire systems, the original ones, had a screen as well, but then they use the Lua scripts and everything you've got to download on your transmitter now, so you use that screen instead, and that is very useful. But I just prefer having the little screen with the little joystick. I don't know why, it's just personal taste, but I quite like that. So that's certainly a positive for this guy here. Obviously the little receiver units themselves, very good, both of them, good quality. This guy is actually unfortunately a damaged one, so I had it on a wing and I crashed and it's ripped off the little connector. Can't see where it was on here somewhere. Yeah, it was like there, so it ripped it off, so I can't use this anymore, unfortunately, which is really annoying, because they're not cheap. That's the other thing as well. This little guy here, well, obviously it's got a similar kind of connector in that, and that could be ripped off, but these are about £5 cheaper than these guys. And these guys, unless you buy the special edition one, don't come with the Immortal T antenna. They come with the other antenna, which is still good as far as I can see. I've not had a chance to use them yet, but I think these are much easier to use, and they're certainly much more popular from what you see online. Whereas obviously this guy comes with this antenna, it's the only one it comes with, but you can use other 2.4 gigahertz antennas if you wish. And then obviously you've got the standard little connector on this guy to fit it, so that's got a positive in this regard. When we come down to the antennas, move this to one side, they kind of have an opposite problem, if you see what I'm saying. I'll explain what that is. This guy is very large and this guy is very small. Now I've got a quad here, can I explain? This had like a normal receiver on it, so I ran the receiver cables on the arm, and they were on some ties, and they came off the arm that side, and that was fine. But obviously with this I've had some issues and problems. I haven't got a 3D printed part, and I can get them on the back where it comes off there, so I kind of fit it up there, and I think that's out of the way of the props, and it should give a good signal coverage and everything else. I'm not sure if it's right to have it so close to my camera, but I think it should be okay. I can't see any reason why it wouldn't be. If there is a reason, tell me, because I don't want to fly, you know, a little while away and then have this fall out the sky because I put the antenna in the wrong place. But this antenna can be a bit of an awkward pain to put anywhere. But if you can find a good location to put it, like as I said, a 3D printed part, then it's brilliant. You can get it fitted. A lot of companies make 3D printed parts. A lot of quads come with them as standard, just as one of the bits you get in the pack with the frame. You get a part just so you can fit the Immortal T antenna, because they're that popular. So that's excellent. And because the antenna is so large, if you've got a big model, well then they can stick out of the way, even if you sort of put it on an arm perhaps, or even in the middle, or on the front or something like that. If you can find a good place, when you found that location, they're brilliant. You get a nice good coverage of the big antennas, so that's good. And obviously these antennas are readily available to buy if you chop the ends up or something like that in a crash, so you can get them to replace it, which is good. I'm not quite sure about the actual sort of shape of it. You'd think they'd have like a nodule or something like that, which could get a cable tie around there. I mean, if you get 3D printed part or something like that. But sort of taping it on and things, it's a bit of a pain, I suppose. But you can get it fitted, and once it's fitted, you get good coverage all around. Well, as I said, this guy has almost the opposite problem. Whereas this is quite large and requires some thinking about, this is quite small and also requires some thinking about. And I'll use the example of this quad here. If I was to put it on the arm like that, well, that would be fine, wouldn't it? That'd be great. But unfortunately, if you were to fly like that, well, now it's starting to be covered by the battery and by the frame. Because it's only a single antenna, it doesn't really stick out very far. I mean, you could put it on the front like that perhaps, and that might be all right, flying away from yourself, or on the back as well. If we show it there, it's quite narrow. So yeah, I mean, that should be okay. I couldn't see any reason why it wouldn't be, but you could have some problems. I'm not quite sure. The range issues. Obviously, the ideal would be to have it that way, but then, you know, where could you fit that? Obviously, over time, more 3D printed parts will come out for this, and that will solve that problem. There's a few other things I do like about it as well, not including that. The cable is quite flexible. Certainly, it's a bit more flexible than the one for the Crossfire system. So you can see they're about the same length. The fact this is flat is quite useful. So when you're putting it on an arm, for example, on this quad here, it fits nice and flat on the arm. And then you can quite see it. I hope you can. Quite a nice little feature. As you can see, it's got these little tabs here. And those little tabs are really useful. I've seen someone online create a 3D printed part, and those tabs basically made a little square in the end of sort of this 3D printed part, and that tab sort of pushed into it, and then it locked in place because of those little sort of tabs on there, and that meant that he could have the antenna sitting on the back of his quad held really nicely, and that's quite useful. With this guy here, what I've done, because it's flat, I put a little bit of double-sided tape You can see that there underneath the antenna and the arm, because it's flat, it sits nice and flat, it's not going to move, and then a cable tie around it, and that tie is being held in place so it's not going to slip down because it's on the other side of those two little tabs. So you can see that. Camera will focus. You can see that there, so that's not going anywhere, and that's nice and taut, and that's worked really well in this case. So that's quite useful. It would be nice to have, perhaps, I know because of the frequency it works on, but if they could work it out, to have a slightly longer antenna with these, so that you could have it, you know, not maybe necessarily as long as this antenna, but certainly that would be useful in certain cases, but you could have it sticking out the side a bit better so you can get better coverage. But obviously doing work on different frequencies, and that has an effect on the size of the antenna, which is obviously what's happened between the differences between these two. I know that there is a diversity receiver coming out, so that should fit in, give you the double antennas, which will help you with bigger models. But I'm beginning to see exactly though where I want to use this particular antenna, and where I'm going to use these guys. I've got this on a plane, and that worked really well, and certainly big craft like that, and that's where I think I'll be using a Crossfire system, my bigger quads, my 5-inch quads and things like that, and planes. I think Crossfire will suit those really, really well. Well, I'm not using the kind of, as like on this guy, the original kind of diversity 2.4 gigahertz. It's a Fly Sky receiver that's got RSSI information, so quite useful, quite small. I think it's the FLI 14 plus, I think. So that's what I got on this quad. I've got it on another quad as well. This guy here on the back, it gives good range, and obviously out of the way, so don't mind if this kind of gets sort of whacked into something. So I think for the bigger quads, Crossfire or maybe Tracer, because all the Tracer systems are diversity, so you could then put the two antennas on two arms, and then you're not going to have a side of the quad where you're not getting good a good receiving position from, good transmission signal. So that I think would be good for bigger quads. And whereas this guy, I mean, imagine if I tried to get on this little toothpick. I know you can buy small antennas, but then they limit the range. But if I imagine if I was trying to fit this on here, I mean, it's massive compared to the quad. Certainly on the little sort of 2-inch, 3-inch size quad, this isn't really suitable. Whereas you can see here, it fits perfectly fine. It really suits it. I'm not going to affect any weight distribution or anything like that, and should give a really good signal and a really good range on this little quad. Certainly much better than putting a tiny little antenna. If I show you what I normally do on this guy here, which is the same frame, the guitar pick frame, with a different receiver and different motors, slightly smaller props, but I just have it running up there, so it's just a tiny little receiver, but it's not too bad, but it's not going to give us good range as that guy. So I'm thinking on my little quads, certainly I'll be putting the Ghost system, and on the bigger quads I'll stick with Crossfire. But like I said, I've been impressed with both these systems. They both have their strengths, they both have their weaknesses as such. They're not weak systems, but they just have situations that they're suited for, more or less. So I know I've rambled on in this video a bit, but I've been really impressed with these, and these are very important systems going ahead. Because I can see in a couple of years' time, people not really using the other types of receivers that we use anymore, the FR Skies and the Fly Skies, systems like that, even though they're a lot cheaper and, you know, easy to replace, because they all seem to be, you know, copies or clones, and you get the original one. The original ones are 40 quid or 30 quid, and the copies are like $8.99. Who's going to buy the original one, and things like that. Their systems, I just think they're good when you start out, but if you're really serious about it, you want to get a good connection to your quad. There's a lot of money flying in the sky then, and you don't want to have it fall out of the sky for some issue. And I think you're going to have less issues with these systems. I can see in a few years' time most people just going straight to these systems, or the Tracer system as well, which unfortunately I don't have. Maybe in the future at some point, but at this moment I don't. But I can see people going to these systems. I think these are very important systems. This is a mature system. A lot of people love it, and I can see why. I honestly can. And this is the new guy, and it's a good system, and I can see the quality of it now, and I can see in the future it performing very, very well and making those improvements. Perhaps it will never get to where Crossfire is. I don't know. To be honest, there'll always be people who will say, no, I'm never going to touch it. Or people here say, oh, no, I'm not bothered by Crossfire. I can understand why you'd have both of those opinions. But for me, using both systems in different circumstances is probably the best of both worlds. I can understand why you'd want to miss out this system compared to, say, Tracer, but for me, I've got this system here just because I'd ordered it before Tracer even was announced or came out. I could have got that. I could have waited and got Tracer if I'd known about it. Perhaps I would have done, but I've got this system now, so I'm going to use it, and I am very impressed. So like I said, this video has gone for a very long time. If anyone's here at the end of this video, thank you so much for watching my content. I appreciate you listening to my inane ramblings, and perhaps I'll catch you in a video in the future. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Bye bye.